Well, good morning, everyone. And every day we rise is a great day to be alive. And welcome to Portsmouth Coffee Talks morning show. I'm James Slim Overton, and I'm here with co-host Leah Drake Stitt. And we have a guest host this morning, Camila Overton Amin. And the Overton, if you're wondering, we've been checking to see if we're related. I think the more we checked, the more we found out we weren't. We start throwing around names and everything, but that still doesn't mean we're not. I told her I still claim her as my sister.
Yes.
But anyway, assalamu alaikum, by the way, to you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yes. And I hope I said that right. But anyway, thank you everyone for joining us this morning. And our special guest or our featured guest is Dr. Bruce Copeland. And he's not here yet. Hopefully he'll come on because the subject we had was the psychological effects of slavery on today's society. And we definitely wanted to have him here, have someone that studies human behavior to sort of lead us in that discussion. But we're going to start out by, since we have Ms. Amin here, we're going to start out talking about her book. She's a local author here in the Hampton Roads area. And she has written a book called Hidden in Plain Sight. It's been out for a while. I interviewed her on the Slim Nation One-on-Ones podcast right before the official book launching. And, it was amazing. While we were talking, I told her Amazon had her book out, and she hadn't realized that her book was out already on Amazon. So it was really early in the process when we had our conversation. So, but while we're waiting for Dr. Bruce to come on and talk about, tell us a little bit about your book and what it's about and why it might be important for some people to purchase the book.
Yes, sir. Well, my book is Hidden in Plain Sight. Are You Being Groomed for Love Bombing, Spirit Breaking, and Abandonment? And the book covers 9 red flags that you're being groomed for abuse. That is whether it's mental, physical, spiritual, or financial. And 8 steps to recovery. The book came about after my son and I were abandoned by my former husband on a family vacation. And I didn't know that people did things, like this. And the more I started talking
on a family vacation, what like
yeah,
you
it
all
was a family vacation, and it was our wedding anniversary. That is why we were on the vacation.
Oh,
wow,
And,
what a time to pick. It seemed like it was, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes, it was definitely purposeful. I came to find out it was definitely not, his first time doing something similar to a previous spouse. And so the more I started talking about it, the more I found out other women would say, oh yeah, it happened to me. It happened to my mother, my sister, my coworker, my daughter's going through that right now. And I'm like, are you serious? And I really felt like I was, in a horrible bubble. But then, like I said, the more I talked about it, the more people told me about their experiences or that of a friend or a family member or a coworker. So to kind of fast forward, I filed a formal complaint and I spoke about it publicly in our religious community. And I filed a formal complaint, for abandonment and desertion. But I did also file I took legal steps, but I took complaints steps in my religious community. And once I did that, I was invited to write a 7-week column in the Muslim Journal about abandonment in the Muslim community, because it's very prevalent. Sometimes Muslim couples don't have a legal marriage license, which I did, but this makes it even easier, or the grooming process is easier within religious communities. So once I did the 7-week series, I was getting emails and inboxes and things like that from other women to say, hey, it just doesn't happen to Muslim women. You only wrote about them. And that is kind of what segued into me interviewing women who were Muslim, Christian, Catholic, African American, South American, and Caucasian about their experiences. I am a federal policy analyst by profession. So I analyzed the policy and procedure of grooming in all, for all sorts of abuse, and the policy and the procedure for abandonment. And it turns out with all the women that I interviewed, they experienced the same steps. And so that's how I developed those 9 red flags, interviewing the women, and they talked about the red flags that they ignored. And then in the end, it was just amazing that all of the women, although they came from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different religious backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds, they all experienced, including myself, the same grooming process. And all of the women, all of the men, I would say, were not what you would expect. Like, you would think someone who does something like this is kind of living on the outskirts of the community, or maybe they're transient and but this wasn't the case. The men who were educators and psychiatrists and professionals in their field, are conducting this type of behavior and getting away with it because people are afraid to come forward because of their perceived status.
Mm.
Yeah. So, as as you hear, and the subject about how the psychological effects of slavery, yeah, I guess if in a small way, some ways, some of that, might trickle down or be associated with what you're going through. You talk about the control, and you also talk about in your book what to look for. You give women signs of what to look for as far as someone that's just trying to control your life. To look for the things to look for in the beginning, and that might also be some psychological hand me down from slavery, where men wanted to control their women. So a lot of things. So it might be have a little something to do with that as well.
Well, definitely there's a link with the post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic slave syndrome, and that type, after that type of trauma and abuse. The From what I from my research, all of the men that were, involved with the women, whether they were, in some cases they were engaged, in other cases they were married, they all had narcissistic tendencies as well. And so while I was doing my research about abandonment, that's where the narcissism, developed in the research process. That the only people that actually do this, if you're kind of wondering if your spouse or your partner is a narcissist, that abandonment piece is the key. They're the only ones that would do that. Others will have bad behavior. And so I do talk a lot in my book extensively, because I don't want people to get confused, because people use narcissism quite frequently and they use it mostly in the wrong context. But bad behavior does not a narcissist make. And so I go through great lengths in the beginning of the book. I know some people, they want to get to the interviews and get to the meat of what happened, but I wanted people to be clear about what we're talking, about when we say narcissism. And so I do talk about the differences between bad behavior and narcissism. They're close, they're like apples and oranges, but the narcissist will have, unlike bad behavior, the narcissist will have intent from the beginning. Because oftentimes people exhibit bad behavior because of anger or a situation, bad upbringing, no home training, all kinds of things can attribute, come with bad behavior, immaturity. They're just not mature. But the narcissist starts out with the intent to groom, the intent to abuse, the intent, to manipulate. That's their intent from the beginning. And they will have no type of remorse. Most people, when they have bad behavior, even if they intended to do something at that time, later on, as they mature or as the situation changes, they'll say, I just really could have done something differently. I won't do that again. Or they may just feel bad about it. But this is not the case with the narcissist, which is why they can walk off from families and just abandon them and never look back.
So can you identify just a few of the beginning signs? Those red
yes.
flags that you talk about?
Yes, ma'am. So one of the main things is the mirroring, because when you meet someone, even if it's just in a friendship or for a relationship or marriage, they, a narcissist will always try to mirror you, to give you the false impression that, you're just alike. And so you'll think, oh, we're soulmates. So whatever you like, they like, whatever you hate, they hate, but one of the things I caution women about in the book is if they tell you, let's for instance say one of the ladies in my book said she wanted to open a yoga studio. So her he ended up becoming her fiance. So he says the same thing. I want to open a yoga studio. And now he starts telling her ways she can do this. But he never had this goal. And so I tell people, when someone is telling you, oh, I want to open a yoga studio, or you want to go on Hajj, or you want to open a religious school, or you want to, whatever it is, they're going to say, oh, I want to do that too. But the key is to make sure you ask the appropriate follow-up questions, not only just kind of jump in with them to say, oh yeah, we can do this together, because this is all just to give you a sense of, belonging. You want to ask their family and their friends, what do you think about so-and-so saying he wants to go on Hajj? He wants to open a yoga studio. He wants to have a bookstore. Ask the family and friends, what do you think about this? But the biggest way that they groom you is not only you, they will groom your family, your friends, your coworkers, the neighbors, the mailman, the cat, the dog. Everyone will be pulled into this grooming process. And so when you start to report bad behavior and abuse, no one will believe you, because everyone around you has been groomed. And that is one of the things that they would do to compromise all of your safe spaces.
Mm.
Well, let me say this first for those who might be watching live on YouTube, especially those who might be watching the first time. Make sure you like, subscribe, and comment and share. We appreciate that. And Leah, talking about this before we sort of as laymen get into the subject that we have advertised here. I guess a lot of women will talk to each other about certain things that's going on in their personal lives, and I know sometimes women talk to each other and they're talk about something, what's happening as far as what Miss Amin is talking about, and you wonder, well, why don't you get out of it? And a lot of them don't see it as that easy. It's a lot of variables, the children involved, or maybe he'll change,
Or the comfort level that you've reached
or
in
what
your
do
life.
I do? Yeah, the comfort level,
Mhm.
financial might be financial reasons.
Mhm.
What would I do if I get out there? And a lot of those men will take advantage of women, just like The Color Purple, when the guy
Mister
was telling
Mister.
Whoopi Goldberg's character, what you gonna do without me?
Mhm.
You're this, you're that, you can't do this, you can't do
Mhm.
that. And a
Exactly.
lot of women might feel that way, not
You need to
knowing that they have some worth too out there by
exactly.
themselves. They just have to take a
Have
chance.
to find that power within, you know?
Hmm.
With the well-versed narcissist, you may not see any of those things. There may not be any, of those things apparent, because they're very good. They have a double life. They're very good at hiding manipulation. And so oftentimes the victim doesn't even know that they're being manipulated. They don't even know that they're being abused until it's too late. And so
Mm.
it may not even be like in my case, we never even had an argument throughout the entire marriage.
Hmm.
And so this whole entire thing kind of folded out within 2 weeks. And so, but in hindsight, of course, those red flags were peppered throughout the marriage, but we never had an argument. So there was no, we had, different, conversations about things where we didn't agree all the time, but we never argued. And so, and there was never any type of, lack of, support in the household or anything like that. So there were no immediate things that were apparent, and oftentimes the other women reported the same thing, because they were in the grooming process for quite a long time. With grooming feels good. They wouldn't be able to groom you if it didn't feel good. It feels like
Mm.
love, it feels like support, it feels like companionship. And so in my case, the things that you mentioned definitely happened, but in my case that was not, it's just everything kind of, the mask slipped off, and then 2 weeks
Mm.
later it was all over. But one of the women in my book, she was groomed for quite a long time, for around 9 years, and her husband groomed her into um, physical exploitation. And we're not talking about people who were, we're talking about people who are professionals in their field. They're not, you think, oh, maybe they were into drugs and alcohol and they're living this life. And this was not the case. And that is why, I wanted to show that in this book, those things that people look at people who are great on paper, this is not the only check that you need to make. And so in this case, he started to groom her for exploitation after around, but it was a 9-year process. So she experienced different things, but at the end, this is what, his goal was.
Yeah, and before we move on, I'd like to mention this too about your book. As you know, some people might see and think about Muslim. You are Muslim, and think it's just for that. And in your book, you have quotes from the Quran and the Bible. As far as making sure you reach people. It reaches cross religious beliefs. It's
Hmm.
not about if you're Muslim or if you're Christian or if you're Jewish or whatever. It's about women and something that men should read as well, because a lot of times
They
men
can be
can
groomed as
be
well.
have that be in that behavior and not know it.
Hmm.
Because it's a learned behavior that's passed down, what they noticed in their household. So
Most definitely. And like I said, I did interview women who were Muslim, Christian, and Catholic. And when it comes to men, the men, they're the vanguards. They stand between the cracks. And sometimes the men, definitely the men are groomed too, not for relationship, but they groom the men around the women so they won't have any safe spaces. And so they compromise, their space. But for my book, when I got my 25 beta readers, my test readers before I went to the publisher, I had 25 readers and 17 of them were men. I did that on purpose. I wanted to
Hmm.
make sure that men did not feel villainized by the book.
Hmm.
I wanted to
Hmm.
make sure that it was a fair assessment and that men would feel like, they want to read the book, because men need to protect their daughters and their nieces and their moms. And, and there's no age, for this. So even mothers who are divorced and have grown children will fall, victim to this type of behavior, and they're a prime target. And if you're in the if you're a Christian or Muslim or Catholic, they can hide easily within the religious community because people's guards are down, because you're in the church, you're in the mosque, you're at mass, and your guard is down. And this is how they can really infiltrate religious communities and take advantage of the women there.
Yeah. Camila, you mentioned PTSD, and in our research for our subject today, I saw this term post-traumatic slave syndrome, which is, some of the experts say it's kind of similar, but it's a little different. And Leah, I guess if you talk about the psychological effects of slavery, you think about, I saw one example, one of the doctors was talking about how women today might be chastising their children, uh, and it's more, not so much being mean to them, but as a form of protection, because in the slavery days, women would do that to their kids, so to keep them from being sold, because they would make their kids look less worth,
Hmm.
less worthy of
Yeah.
work or being sold by putting them down in front of the master, or saying, "Oh, you're worth nothing," or telling the master something is wrong with them physically. So that was mainly to protect them, to keep them in the family. So something like that, could pass down, generational things passed down. And often we talk about parents, and sometimes parents might have be mean spirited in what they do, but some of those things internally is a mother actually trying to protect their child. And we on the outside might see it as, wow, she's being hard on them. But so as we talk about the effects, actually I can turn this, let me turn the subject, the title around and into a question. Do you think, do you feel like the psychological effects of slavery on today's society is something that's prevalent?
Are you speaking to Kalima?
Yeah, I was speaking to you,
Okay.
Leah,
Oh, you're speaking to
and,
me.
and goes to both of you, but I wanted you to start off, Leah, with it. You know,
Well, James, I do agree. I do believe that we are experiencing some of the psychological effects of slavery daily in our lives. Not only in, I just lost my thought, and you have to forgive me.
that's
It came,
okay.
it came to me and it left me right then and there. Um, hmm.
But and
Come back to me.
the reason I put in today's society and not specifically in the black community, because we know it goes on in the black community, but today's society, even in the white community, it might we see the effects of it because you coming down, some white people still feel like they're superior to people because of the color of their skin, because you're black, because and directly aligned from slavery. That's the way they felt. So generationally, in the white families, it might have come down even to the day when we see it coming back up or raising this ugly head today, where people feel like they're superior to another human being just because the difference in their shade or the hue of the color of their skin.
When you gave that example, I had not heard that before, but it immediately brought to mind how we really restrict, I know I do. I restrict my son because in his movements because
I
of the
was,
police.
thank you,
He
Kalima.
doesn't
Thank
have
you.
as much
Give me that.
freedom as I would like him to have. And I'm always
Exactly.
not chastising, I'm always reminding him, don't do this, don't do that, don't. Make sure you do this. Make sure if someone approaches you, if anybody, and so it's kind of that same type of behavior. I'm doing that to protect him. It comes down kind of hard, but it's just out of fear that, I don't want you to go to the basketball court and not come back.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and it's just as real
Exactly.
now
What
as it
about?
was back then for the mothers trying to protect
Mhm.
their
Exactly.
children from just by demeaning them and making them seem worthless. And
Mm-hmm.
so the master would say, well, we can't use him, because they were looking for, eh, they couldn't sell some, a slave that was worthless. So that's what the mothers did in order to protect that child. And here we are now doing the same thing because we never know what's going to happen once they go out into the world. And like
Right.
I said, it might seem harsh, but it's something that was necessary then as well as today.
Mhm.
And as Kalima says too, protecting our children to keep them out of the penal system, because the penal system is the new form of slavery, especially for the African American community. Um, and we work hard in disciplining our children to keep them, hopefully to protect them. It's a
Mhm.
protection mechanism that we use in order to keep them out of that system. So the psychological effects, it's still there. It's still there, and we experience, and actually we experience it on a daily basis. And if you want to look at society now, just think about where we are in the political world. The psychological effects of slavery is definitely prevalent in the political world. I was just listening last night to Maya Wiley, the attorney out of New York City, and she was speaking about some of the terminology that's used in the Republican Party now, and speaking of us as a people. When he refers to the DA in New York as a peekaboo. So they use those terminologies, those words that they use, or referring to uh, um, individuals who are in the sports arena as animals. Look at how they described Venus and Serena when they were playing
Mhm.
tennis. Think about how they, even though they enjoy our guys playing sports, but think about some of the terminology and some of the language they use in describing these individuals as athletes. They
Mhm.
use animal terms in order to describe who they are. And that is an effect that has on us as a people. And it is a product of slavery. It is a product of the things that were done to us as a people. And we experience it on a daily basis. I was also listening to Dr. Blackstock, who is a noted gynecologist, and the book that she just wrote on the effect that we have even in giving birth to children.
Mhm.
Black women now are going back to having babies at home because of the trauma that they're experiencing in the hospital,
Mhm.
because we are not seen and not seen as individuals, and we're not, and they don't deal with our pains and our sufferings the way that they deal with others' pains and suffering. So they're going back to the home and having babies and having midwives, because we're more likely when we go in to be subject to C-sections and things that are just unnecessary, and they don't listen to what we're going through. So we see a lot of that still going on today. And I'm hearing it every day, especially with these DA women who are involved. I'm listening to it where black women are involved and not getting their due respect, not looking at how they are capable, how they have learned what they need to learn in order to function properly in the positions in which they hold, but yet and still they treat them with such a level of disrespect. So I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe I'm going off the wrong subject, but I'm just thinking about how society is now reverting back in a way.
yeah, that's related too, because I'm sitting here thinking and doing the research earlier, how amazing it is, how close we are, even though slavery was a long time ago and abolished or whatever, but how close we are today to that, and how it's affecting us still, and it's in some ways subconsciously affecting us in
Mhm,
society. The effects are still heavy, and that's why the conversation is worth having and
mhm,
worth continuing to have. And as they try to block us from reading books, or the generations coming up about knowing about the history, I think it's important for us to continue to talk about those relationships. And a lot of times, that's why when we have somebody like Dr. Copeland or Dr. Ernestine Duncan on, and we'll revisit this again with them, how that
mhm,
study human behavior, they could really tell us, how connected we are to what people went through that we never experienced, but we still
mhm,
feel the effects of it.
Right. And when you think about the post-traumatic slave syndrome, and then post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic disorder, you
Hmm.
know, those characteristics are still prevalent, and they're like sleeplessness and stress and
yes,
an inability
yes,
to eat and anxiety and you know um just reliving things over and over again in your head, prevailing thoughts, even as mothers, as fathers, we have prevailing thoughts in our head every time, our children or even our young adults leave the home.
mhm,
This is post-traumatic stress. And people don't look at it like that because we live it every day,
mhm,
and just for your children to go to school and come back and you think, you know, about gun violence in the
yes,
schools, and we're watching this over and over again on TV, when we're watching our young black men being killed, for no reason over and over again. It creates this post-traumatic stress and this
Hmm.
post-traumatic syndrome.
Yeah, and as we talk sometimes often on other shows about other subjects, how some blacks in communities can't get along if we try to go into business and something like that, and other ethnic groups come in our communities and do better than we do because we can't get along, because you might be able to trace that back to slavery, because at
mhm,
some point with some of the slaves it came a matter of survival. I might have to tell on you in order for me to live.
exactly,
So my
exactly,
allegiance to you, and we all in the same boat, but we all trying to live, and my allegiance to you is my life is worth more than my allegiance to you, is what I was trying to say. And
mhm,
maybe some of those things can trickle down into our society today, is why explaining some of the reasons why we can't in some cases get along.
yeah,
Like,
putting each other down in order to build oneself up.
yeah,
Thinking that elevates us when we put someone else down, and it doesn't do that.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
it would have made sense for us back in slavery to come together, but that wasn't a good thing. I mean, to
didn't do
come
that.
together and try to organize and speak up, that
Mhm,
wasn't a good thing. So
exactly.
even though we had kinship and we felt love for each other back then, like I said earlier, it came about a survival, and you couldn't come together as a group and really do anything that without risking your life. So,
Mhm,
Right.
and that attitude might be stuck in some of our brains, way back in the back of our brain. But the survival thing is what I'm
mhm,
saying.
And even how, they use religion, to control us, during the
exactly.
enslavement. And just recently, you all may have already known about it. I just found out that there was a slave Bible, and I knew
Yes,
that they only
yes.
taught information, that was leading towards that type of manipulation. I didn't know that there was an entire book that, that had missing parts of the Bible that was
Mhm.
actually, just for that purpose. And so even that type of manipulation, mental, physical, spiritual, and financial, when all of, the things that you need to be able to survive are compromised, there's no way for you to form a bond to rebel. Lots of the enslaved Africans rebelled. Lots of them fought back,
Mhm.
but it wasn't on the mass scale that people say, oh, I would have just done this. But when
Mhm.
your livelihood and your children, and your spouses, so many men escaped from slavery and went back
Mhm.
because they did not want to leave their spouses, and they would go back into slavery to be with the family. When you think about that type of bond, it kind of, we need to look at that as well. And they say, oh,
Mhm.
they just didn't, you know, have this bond. They didn't have this cohesiveness, but so many men escaped and went back.
Yeah.
They couldn't get their families out, and so they went back into slavery.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Kalima,
I
it's amazing.
wonder what would have happened if, maybe they had let the slaves come over and keep their religious
Language, their
identities. If
identity.
they were Muslims or whatever, we would still have our names. We wouldn't be John Smith and Fred Williamson. You know,
But
and
that's your
how much
part of
different that would
okay,
have been
self-worth.
on our psyche.
Mhm.
To really would Christianity even be a part of our lives? I
You
mean,
know, the uneducated man is not fit to be a slave, right? I'm
Mm,
quoting,
that's right.
but they had to strip us of everything because,
Mhm.
and we still were not suited for enslavement because of even our spirit.
Mhm. And I hate to keep going back to politics, but I'm just seeing it so prevalent every day now. With some of the things I'm seeing taking place in that political world. Senator Butler of California, she's the one who took Dianne Feinstein's place,
mhm,
and they were asking her about how the racial barriers that she's feeling within the Senate, and she said that the perception of Black women and their leadership has just been diminished by so many. She said, when you look at those women who are so gifted, so talented, and prepared to take on the jobs and the roles that are given to them, like Val Deming and Stacey Adams, and we hear it even in our own community. We don't talk about the brilliance of these women and their organizational skills and what they bring to the table. We find other things to talk about, like, oh, she's so dark, she can't be president, or she's too fat. We look at those outward appearances to put these individuals down, as opposed to looking at the brilliance of these ladies and what they bring to the table. And she said since she's come to Congress, they tell her things like, not that she's smart or that she's intelligent or that she brings something to the table. They tell her that you have the right approach. You have such a great temperament. That's a form of grooming, also, Kalima. That's
Mhm,
grooming. They're grooming her into believing that she need to take a step back. Don't get too aggressive. Don't get too loud. You're the right person for this job, for this moment, as long as I can control what you do and what you say.
mhm.
So that's grooming going on there, right within our Senate. Oh, she said the willful dismissal of whatever you bring to the table. They
Mhm,
just dismiss, no matter how great it is, they just dismiss it. And form of racism as well. And look at Nikki Haley coming out talking about, if you vote for Joe Biden, that's a vote for Kamala Harris. What's wrong with that? She's
what's wrong
definitely
with that? I
qualified for
mean,
the
Give me 2
job,
votes.
well,
more than qualified.
well, it is the truth, because if you vote for him, you got her as the vice president. So
But what
that's
she's
the
saying
truth.
is, if you
So
vote for her, she
and
would be
and
president, not that she would be the
Right, it's a
vice
scare
president.
tactic. It's a dog whistle
The
for
dog
white
was
people to know,
yeah,
don't vote for Joe Biden even if you're a white Democrat because you may
exactly.
end up with Kamala
yeah,
Harris.
And
that's
it's just
playing to
like,
those people that will never want to see anybody of color in
Mhm,
there again.
mhm,
Because that Obama thing really threw them for a loop. But even with and we do this too in our own communities. We have people, they say, "Oh wow, you speak so well." Why
Yes.
not? Why shouldn't I speak
You
well?
speak well. You
Someone
speak
You know,
said,
well for a little black
and
boy.
just and Leah, Coach Savage, and people often were surprised because he was, known at first for a football coach.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he started elevating into the administration in the school system, and people heard him actually talk, that's the same way he talked to those
That
football
very
players.
same way.
Because you heard the football players say he would talk to them, and they'd be saying, "What does that mean?" Because
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
he he was a Hampton grad, and even before he went to Hampton, I think his mother was a teacher. So in his household, he learned the King's English, and articulated it well. And
Mm-hmm.
people used to be surprised, even in our own community. Like I said, it was, oh wow, because he was a coach. They just figured, and
Mm-hmm.
why not? Well, why shouldn't we speak well?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what prevents us from speaking well, and then why? And and I see young people now who are capable of speaking well, but choose not to speak well in order to fit in. Help me with that, Kalima.
But it's a way you can do that, and a lot of the educated educators and educated people will tell you they learn, and I'll use the term, they learn the code switch, and
Exactly.
yes,
depends on where
Exactly.
they are, in order to get their message over. Sometimes you have to know your audience, or know
Mm-hmm.
who you're talking to in order
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that your message gets over. You might be at a level here and say, well, they might miss my point because of the way I'm articulating, but
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know, but not to do it like you say, Leah, to fit in, because
Mm-hmm.
to dumb yourself
Yeah,
down
exactly.
in order
Exactly.
to fit in. But in order to know, you have to know where you have to use, where you have to code switch.
Exactly.
and I
Exactly.
often, in my 30 years in government, I would be able to pick out those who went to HBCUs and those who did not. And it will always be the ones who were most, confident and outspoken. Not saying that others are not, but I will often see we will be in a conversation, a very, robust conversation. And then when other people were added to the conversation, they will pull back. And so
Mm.
I started asking people, not directly, but kind of, what school did you go?
Mm-hmm.
HBCUs, they're always very confident. And I think we need that cocoon of the
Exactly.
HBCU, that
Exactly.
space to
Mm-hmm.
grow, especially in those formative years when you're like 18 to 24
Mm-hmm.
and you have the freedom to be yourself and be confident in who you are. But I think when they go to, the predominantly white
Mm-hmm.
institutions, that they don't have this. And so they show up on the job as a different person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know and this is still more of that post-traumatic slave syndrome where when other people enter the room, now we have conversations that we don't have publicly, but when other people enter the room, I'm going to dumb myself down, or I'm going to be quiet, or I'm not going to be as confident, that I know what I know.
Mm-hmm.
You have
Mm-hmm.
to know what you know, no matter who's in the room.
Hmm.
Exactly.
And I would
Exactly.
see that, just I would just watch the room and think, wow, this person had all these great ideas when we were talking amongst ourselves, but when others come into the room, now they're quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I did start to ask people, and I came to my own conclusion. It wasn't any
That's
scientific
another
research.
book for you,
These are
Kalima.
Yeah,
HBCU
That's
graduates
another
over
book,
here.
Kalima.
Hmm?
Do the study. That's another book for you now.
and I have to add this, as we a lot of people were watching Fonnie Willis's father
Willis. Yes. Yes.
testimony, and he was talking, but he threw that in. And by the way, when I was at Harvard,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know, just letting them know, but and they probably wouldn't have thought that until he said that, but he let them know, I'm not just sitting up here, you know, uh, you not learn it or not knowing what I'm talking about. I've probably been some places where a lot of you haven't even been. So, he just threw that in, and as we talk about dog whistles and how other people try to do things, we have to learn how to throw those messages out to them and let them know who they're dealing with. And I think that was a classic example of what you were saying, Kalima. You know,
Right.
uh, and I don't know if he came from an HBCU, but he was an attorney and everything. But he threw that little piece in there, to let
And,
them know
and think
who
about
they
the
were
level.
dealing with.
Think about those individuals who were coming against Fani, and how they the how they asked questions of her, how they asked questions of her father, how even though her father's an attorney, who's been among some of the greatest in the nation. Just think about and how they treated them and the deference that they gave to the governor. They didn't speak to him in the same manner in which they spoke to those individuals. It's just like they placed him up on this higher pedestal, although all had gone through the same learning procedure. Yes, he'd been a governor, but they didn't treat those Fani and her father and Wade and those with the level of respect that they treated her, the governor. Just go back and look at the questioning and how they questioned them. It was just totally different, totally different.
Yeah, and again, that's why we see that connection, that started back in slavery, and in some ways, although we are free to do a lot of things, we still see a lot of those attitudes that were passed down from then, even to today's society. And it's crazy. It's something we have to deal with. But a lot of times we don't even realize, you know, it's still going on. What's going
Mhm.
on?
But getting back to what Kalima says about the HBCUs, I'm going to see where Fani and my DA in New York, where did they go to school? Because I
Mhm.
tell you what, the love of confidence that they have, what Fani maybe she should not have done, but we all do things that we should not do, but it does not diminish our abilities to perform our jobs.
Yeah,
Okay,
Exactly.
but the love of confidence that
yeah,
she showed, as well as the DA in New York, the love of confidence, because they know, once again, we go back to that thing where parents tell us, you have to be 10 times better. You got to be 30 times better than those who you're working with. And they truly came prepared.
yeah. Well,
They
and whether
came
they went
prepared.
to HBCU or not, that probably started way before their
Yes.
college days.
Yes.
They might have gone to IC Narkham,
Yes. How about that?
or a lot of it started in the home, which we talk about a lot. What happens in the home before they even get to the point of being educated outside of the
Mhm,
home. A lot of things, a lot of those confidence building
mhm.
attitudes start in the home.
Well, her father intimated that when he got on the stand.
Oh yeah,
He had
especially
prepared his
the
daughter. He had
financial
prepared his
lessons he
daughter.
was teaching her.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
So as we talk about the effects, of you think all the effects of slavery, in society these days are negative, or was it some things that we might have picked up from the effects of slavery that might have benefited us down the road?
I
Hmm.
think
That's
I
we
just a
picked up
can't.
question out there.
I think we picked up resilience,
Resilience.
and also being able to take something. Well, Wade Noble, the noted psychologist, used to say that we had the propensity to make things more better. We took little things and created greater things.
Mhm.
And the greater things that we've created, although many were taken away from others, claimed it as their own, but we took things to make life easier for us. So therefore, we found ways in which to invent things and create things. So yeah, I think we learned resilience, we learned creativity, we learned how to make nothing out of nothing, make something out of nothing, and to utilize that. And even today we do that.
Yes. And I think just to piggyback on what you were saying about resilience, I read about, like resilience and the post traumatic growth. And so they were distinguishing the two to say resilience is when, your life just kind of comes apart, let's say, present day, or you have this trauma and you restore your life to normalcy. And then post-traumatic growth is when you not only restore your life to normalcy, you help and repair others. You
Others.
catapult your
Mhm.
life in a new direction. You make meaning of it and you grow from it, and this is called post-traumatic growth. And we
Mhm.
have experienced that as a people over and over again. We had this traumatic situations from slavery on, and we
Mhm.
continue to grow, and not only grow for ourselves, we grow our communities, we grow our religious communities, we grow professionally. And this is what they call post-traumatic growth.
Mhm. Okay, I like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's really important. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, I was wondering about asking that question because some people say, "How do you think we could get anything positive out of slavery?" But when you really look at it, and you ladies expressed it well, that
And it's
there
not
were
to say
some
that
things
slavery
that
was
came
a
out of
positive
there.
thing. That positive we got was just from us. It wasn't
Yeah,
from slavery. It came from us.
Exactly. Came from
Yeah.
within. It
Mhm.
came
yeah.
from within. Mhm.
Anybody that had to go through that for so many years like that and still remain or still survive as a race, you
Mhm.
know, I mean, that's saying something. You have to pull something away from that as something positive, or something that made you even stronger to be able to.
Mhm.
Even when you talk about the Jim Crow days, that stem from slavery, where we were free, but we still had to hold our heads down when we walked past somebody white,
Not look
or
them in the
still
eye.
had to
Yes.
say sir, or still were called boy. I saw
Mhm.
something the other day. Uh, a basketball game, a pro basketball game, and this guy was sitting in the stands, and one of the players on the court, how sometimes the ball goes in the stand, and this guy was called this black player boy, and the
Mhm.
way he said it,
Mhm.
and so that just lets you know it's still out there, you know, and stuff like that is still being passed down. And how that was when somebody called you boy. I can remember in high school at Norcom, and we were still boys, but it was during the '70s, and it was not fashionable to even call us as high
Boy.
school students a boy.
Mhm.
I mean, that was fighting words. We didn't even call each other that because
Mhm.
we knew of our ancestors, our fathers and grandfathers had to put up with that, you
Mhm.
know, to be called boy, and they're in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, you know. So, and just to see that in 2024, still, still coming out of people's mouths that will, that probably don't know anything well, not know anything about slavery, but it was in their household. It was passed
Mhm.
down in their household
Even
to
when you
call a grown man boy.
Mhm.
even when
And
you
they
think
just don't
about
realize how
sorry.
insulting that is to us.
Quick, Kalima.
Go ahead.
Even
I'm
when you
sorry.
think about when we're talking about that post-traumatic slavery syndrome, when you see the Confederate flag, the other day, this guy is going by, I'm walking my dog, and he's going by in this huge truck. He has the Confederate flag, he has a flag, and he has another flag that I didn't even recognize, and then the American flag. But even just seeing him go by with those flags, now I'm keenly attuned to him. I'm watching
Oh
his
yes.
truck. He stopped at the light. I'm coming up, I'm walking my dog, and my eyes are on him.
Mhm.
And that's, one of the residual effects of
Mhm.
post-traumatic slavery. Even just seeing the Confederate flag causes alarm when you're riding through, up there by Stratford. There's a huge Confederate flag that kind of almost flies
Yes.
over
Yes.
95,
Right.
and going around, different areas around here. When you see the flag, it gives you pause. And
Mhm.
you make
Mhm.
note of where you saw it, and now you're on guard, and you're watching your surroundings, in those areas.
And just think about after all this time, imagine one of us riding home at night and something, and you see this field and you see a cross burning.
Mm.
Would do you think you could ride by there and it not affect you in some kind of way,
Well, it has to
deep
be in your
down in
way.
your soul,
Mhm.
because we know the symbolism of that,
Mhm.
so
Yeah. That's very
so
true.
the psychological effects are still here within us, even though we didn't experience
Mhm.
actual
Mhm.
slavery. But
Mhm.
we know, uh, we know the history of it. We know that our ancestors suffered through that kind of indignity, and you know, so it's a generational thing, and it still affects us today.
It does affect us today.
And we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place between trying to recover from that trauma and then making sure that we don't forget the trauma. And it's actually a very fine line between traumatizing yourself by remembering, but we
Mm-hmm.
can't forget that because we need to make sure we, teach our children this information so they
Exactly.
can be aware so
Exactly.
we don't fall back into it and we understand some of the subtle racial slurs and things our
Mhm.
children may not even understand if we don't explain
Exactly.
it to them.
Mhm.
And I recall my son when we were living in Maryland, he was in the 3rd grade and we were riding in the car. He said, I can't play with so and so anymore. And I said, what happened? He said, he asked me to play slave.
Mm.
So I'm just driving, and I'm thinking, what? And after I asked more, he said that, I said, well, what did you do? He said, I told him, I'm not going to play unless you're going to be the slave.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so then he walked away. My son walked away. I said, well, what did the other kids do? He said, they went off. I said, well, what was the game? And he said, I don't know. He said, he had walked away, went to get on the monkey bars. And, but the other kids didn't know. And so I was talking to one of my coworkers and she said she never told her children about slavery because she's trying to kind of protect them. And so that means her children would have been one of the children to go off to play this game.
Exactly.
We have
Mhm.
to really, and she was saying she thought they were too young because they were just
Mm-hmm.
in 2nd grade. I said, but I never would have thought, even for my son, I think he was it was 2nd or 3rd grade. His response to me was a surprise, but his response was acknowledgement of, I know what this is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not
Mm-hmm.
doing this.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
unless you're going to be the slave, I'm not doing it. And so
Mm-hmm.
he recognized even in 2nd and 3rd grade because he already knew about this because
Mm-hmm.
our grandparents talked to us about it. Our parents talked to us about it. We take our children, we talk to them, we take them to these types of discussions. And so even in 2nd and 3rd grade, he's understanding what is being told to him. And the other kids run off to play this game. I reported it to the principal. She was very slow. She was African American, very slow to address it. And after my 2nd time I spoke to her, I said, now you can address it or I can take it up with the superintendent
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because has to be addressed,
Mm-hmm.
and so, but it turns out the young man got it from his brother who was in high school and
Mm-hmm.
that and so it just kind of perpetuates, this cycle. But we have to make our children make sure they're informed just about the police. We have to inform them about our
Exactly.
history, but
Exactly.
not in a way that we're re-traumatizing each
Mm-hmm.
other,
Mm-hmm.
and ourselves.
Kalima, is so important that we teach our children the history. It's so
Mhm.
important that they know from whence they've come. It's important. I keep reminding James, my Sankofa, but the reminder that you go back to the past and get the best of the
Mhm.
past. And it doesn't mean that you delete any of it because all of it is important. The
Mhm.
bad, the good, the bad, and the
And the
ugly.
ugly.
You need to know all of it in order to bring it to the present so you can move forth into the future. And this
Mhm.
way, nobody can confuse you into believing something that's not true. As long as you know your history, nobody can fool you. And a lot of people, they don't want to teach it, but it's important that
Mhm.
our children, especially, know their history. And if they don't, I'm telling you, you're seeing it a lot now. If you're not prepared for it, you're going to get caught up in something you don't want to get caught up with because you
Mhm.
got younger people now, skinheads, you know,
Mhm.
talking about taking back their country. Uh, and we're the ones who built this country. On the backs of slaves, this country was built. So it's important that we teach our children so our children can understand from whence they've come, when they can understand the strength of those individuals who came before them. And like I was talking to a group of kids the other recently, and my topic for them was that many died, but not your ancestors. They were able to make it throughout slavery, throughout Jim Crowism, throughout segregation. They were able to survive because you learn those skills. If you
Mhm.
don't know, you don't learn those skills, those survival skills that you need, and when to pull out those survival skills. So we have to teach our children their history. It's important.
It's very
And
important.
I'm
And
glad that you addressed that issue because some others who would have just said, oh, just go ahead on
Mm-mm.
and play the game. No, no, no.
Mm-mm.
yeah, That's a
I told
classic
my son
example.
in front of the principal, if he asks you again, I told him what to do. I'm not going to say here. But
Uh-huh.
she said, you can't tell him that. I said, but you need to take care of it. I told my son what to do the next time.
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
this is not going to be a continuous thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the right thing was to trace it back to the source.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yes.
Exactly.
Well, as we close out now, I want to thank you, ladies. For the discussion. We had a great discussion between. Uh, we're not experts in human behavior, but I think we lended our what we knew about the subject, and I think it was a very good discussion. And before we go, Leah, we're still in Black History Month, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, to tell the people about some of the things you've been doing, especially the events going on at
Oh, it has been.
Emmanuel, and the significance of Emmanuel being a part of church, being part of the Underground Railroad.
Mm-hmm. It has been such a powerful week. History Alive players in Portsmouth. Every Saturday, they've been presenting some aspect of African American history. And once again, the first couple of weeks, more whites than blacks, but they need to learn as well. They really need to learn. But they talked about
That's probably
Lafayette the first
that's
week.
probably best.
The black James Lafayette, who was a Portsmouth resident, who was a double spy, which was a truly impactful and powerful presentation. This past week they did the Underground Railroad, which was really a great presentation. Last week they did the Civil Rights Movement at Emmanuel Church every Saturday at 1 o'clock. They only charge $5, and the money goes towards scholarship for students. Now, next week, they're going to have a production on Emmanuel Church and how Emmanuel Church came about, Emmanuel AME Church, and it was a part of the Underground Railroad. And once they do that history, they're going to take you through the church to those areas that were used to house those enslaved people, preparing to get them to the water in order to get them on a ship and out of this area and onto freedom. Um, this, like I said, it's every Saturday at 1 o'clock. And Emmanuel still has within its church the benches or the pews that were built by slaves still
Oh,
there at Emmanuel. The hiding places are still there. And such a rich lesson in history given by those Portsmouth Alive players. And another point is that the Portsmouth Alive players, many times you can see them on Saturdays at the doing the farmers market. Like Calissa, I can't think of Calissa's last name, who was a slave who enslaved woman who earned her freedom. She's sometimes the character is walking around in downtown Portsmouth. But a lot of history given by the History Alive players, and I do. There are quite more blacks there this past week because the Red Hatters were there.
Mm.
So the Red Hatters had a great presence, but Mr. Alexander and Carolyn, I can't think of her last name. I'm losing it, but they are doing an amazing job of presenting history to us on these Saturdays, and I wish it would continue beyond the 4 weeks because there's so much history that they can impart to us about individuals who grew up in this area and the roles that they played here in order for us to have the freedom that we're experiencing today. It's because of those individuals. It's upon their shoulders that we stand. So it's a great time in downtown Portsmouth.
And
well, I
and
was
Leah,
just putting
and
that in
Leah,
my
you
phone
mentioned
instead
to
of
me
the
that some of the white audiences were emotionally moved
Oh, they
by
were very
some of
emotionally
the
moved.
information that was shared,
They
and
were
it's
very
not to
emotionally
make them feel bad, but you have to know the history, and if it moves
exactly.
you emotionally, that means something as well.
Something's
It's
touching your
not
heart.
to make you feel guilty, but deep down in your heart, knowing that history, it
Yeah.
was wrong,
Yeah,
and probably what needs to be done going forward.
because when they had the lady to talk about when she did talked about Emmett Till's mother and Emmett Till and how she opened up that casket, talked about that 16th Street bombing of the church and those little girls who lost their lives. It touched a lot of individuals, and I'm sure they may have heard it before, it may in passing, but it just kind of brought it home to them
Mm.
during this presentation. Many with tears in their eyes, and I mean, Hopefully you take this information, don't just have the tears, but take the information home and teach your children and your grandchildren so they can understand what took place as well.
Mhm.
Sister Kalima, thank you for coming on, and of
Thank
course,
you for the
I
invite.
want everybody to experience or buy that wonderful book you had written, and it's a personal story, but it's something that you felt like you had to tell, and so you've been going around like on a book tour, pretty much, and tell us some of the events that are coming up as far as you're concerned concerning your book.
Yes, I've been doing a lot of interviews through like I spoke told you earlier, through the publisher at, Reader House and different places. But the in-person events, I will be in Williamsburg on March 2nd, and I have an event scheduled for Charleston as well as Richmond. I have an event that I'm working on for DC, and then there will be one in Cleveland. So I'm just reaching out because the book launch event was a large event, and so now what I'm doing is I've had several events at the House of Consciousness in Norfolk. I'm doing smaller roundtable discussions so
That's
people
what
can
I was
talk
hoping.
about their experiences with the different forms of abuse, mental, physical, spiritual, and financial abuse. Not just to talk about the book. Some people had already read the book, some hadn't, some didn't know about the book. They came to talk about their experiences, so we wanted to talk about those non-red flags and how you can recover, provide resources. And so what I'm doing now is smaller roundtable discussions with groups, so they can share. And these have not been on Facebook because those roundtable discussions are not live streamed. I tell people, put
Right,
your phones away, do not
right,
record, do
right.
not go on live, because people need a safe space, to
Mm-hmm.
talk, to share, and to learn, how they can recover from, these traumatic events.
Kalim, I'm glad to hear that because well, you sent me a request, so I'm going to answer the request.
Okay.
But I was hoping that I think it's crucial that we
Mhm.
can get some women together to sit in here in this area. And I would like to work on that because I'm thinking about some
Right.
young people I know and some of the things they've gone through. And I think it need to be a generational thing. If we can pull these ladies together and properly invite you in, and so that we can have that discussion, and prayerfully we can help some of these young people going through some of the very things that you've gone through, and
Yes.
that know that you can't survive.
Yes,
That you
indeed. And I've
can
been
survive.
trying to work at, I've actually been in conversations with some of the HBCUs in the area to talk about, having these type of discussions and their wellness center and providing these books, because it's really at that age, in college. My book is for those 16 and up, but that
Hmm.
college age is when they're really becoming
Exactly.
socialized and in these cocoons on these campuses. A campus is a city, and people don't
Mhm,
understand it's a small city within a city. And
mhm,
so all the things, when you have all these people coming in from different areas, from New York and LA and Florida, and you have all these lifestyles converging together, there are some people coming into these campuses who have this lifestyle.
mhm.
And now they're perpetuating that lifestyle on the college campus. And
Yes.
so, I've been working with several and having some conversations about, having on a larger scale through some of their grant programs to provide this type of resource, for young women. And this is not an age, because when you think about, I'll be 55 in March, and it took me all this time to have this experience. Although it was a horrible experience, it really, I should maybe say, thank you for that, because
Mhm,
it really was caused me to catapult my life in a different direction
mhm,
and to actually write a book. I have a degree
mhm,
in English literature, and I didn't
mhm,
write a book. I had
mhm,
intended to write a book, but I think God finally gave me a purpose to write a book that was going to be helpful. And not saying the other books are not. I'm just saying I think it was just that time. I just had
mhm,
to have that experience. But I want to prevent other people from having to have that experience
mhm, mhm,
altogether, you
mhm,
know. So I do want to connect with the HBCUs. I've had some roundtables with the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, with Hampton University. I've had roundtables with the Delta Sigma Theta,
mhm,
and so I'm trying to create, a space where people can quietly, away from Facebook,
mhm,
have these conversations so they can speak freely, so we can really help people to understand, if you're not being groomed, someone around you may be groomed, and you need to be able to recognize these red flags
Right.
and
Exactly.
stop and stop interrupt the process.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm
Very
so
good.
glad you're doing that on the campuses, because someone who's been to a HBCU, we know that kind of thing goes on at a young age, and it's
Mm-hmm.
no place on a college campus for that kind of uh, mental or physical abuse at a young age. College is not for that. It's for learning and having a good time and creating lifetime friends. And so that kind of conversation needs to be had on those campuses, but especially at a young age, and you're in college, you don't know who to turn to, or you don't, so I think that's so important. And I'm glad you're doing that, because all abuse isn't physical, but some of it is, and sometimes it ends badly. I'll
Yes.
put it
Yes.
that way. So
Yes.
thanks everybody again, and I want to say we're in and out the month. Later this Thursday, we're going to have a young lady from Maryland who has ties here in Hampton, in Portsmouth actually, who wants to present a reading program for children that she wants to present, that she's been doing in Maryland. She wants to bring it to this area. And of course, next Monday we're going to have Ken Wright, who is a local author and one of the Buffalo. What are their titles? There, Buffalo Riders.
Buffalo Riders.
Buffalo Riders that you see in all the parades. Um, you know, keeping us informed about the Buffalo Soldiers back in the day. They ride the horses in all the parades, and they do a lot of charitable things. So we're going to have him on to talk about his book and
We'll
that.
get
And we're going to end the month and nobody has talked about this. This is a leap year, so we actually have
Mhm.
one more day
it.
than normal. We got the 29th of February, which happens every 4 years. So next Thursday on the 29th, we're going to end it out with, since this is also Heart Month, we're going to end it out with some of my heart friends talking about our experiences with heart issues and transplants and heart failure and heart disease. So stay tuned for the rest of the month on Coffee Talk. And also, I see a lot of people are watching live on YouTube and Facebook. And the ones watching on YouTube, make sure, if you haven't already, you like, subscribe, and comment, and share this information with all your friends.
Mhm.
Good information. And I think we had a good talk, or even though we didn't have an expert on here, and we will follow up and have an expert to sort of bring that to us. I think it still worked out fine. Thank you, ladies. We appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank
Thank
you all.
you.
Have a great day.
You too.
You